Assignment 25, Observations, Round 2. The snowstorm actually hit today, so we got another snow day, but somehow I still had to see Dr. Doris, because in Dad's mind, nothing can stop him from pursuing mental health, not even a blizzard. Anyway, I think Mr. Neely had managed to brainwash me with his hashtags and experiments because I kept thinking about the scientific process during therapy. Dr. Doris was talking, and I was trying to listen. Really, I was. But in my head, I was turning her into an experiment. Dr. Doris said, "Today I want us to talk about your mother." And my brain went, observations. Dr. Doris is wearing bright red lipstick. It's snowing so hard today that when we drove here, Dad's windshield wipers had to work overtime, and Dr. Doris's office window is just a wall of white. What if the roads shut down and Dad and I get trapped here? Dr. Doris asks, "What's on your mind, Natalie?" My hands pick up a slinky on the coffee table, and I watch it go back and forth as if my hands don't even belong to me. The plants in this office could use some watering. Dr. Doris asks her question again, carefully, rewording it because, whoops, I forgot to answer. I say nothing. Outside, the wind is crying. Dr. Doris was worried that I wasn't focused during our session, but really, I was just trying to answer my own scientific question. How many questions can I get Dr. Doris to ask? Naturally, as the success of my experiment depended on her getting her to talk, I couldn't talk much myself. I think Mr. Neely would be proud. Dad, not so much. "Okay," Dr. Doris said about halfway through our session. She was probably frustrated. She was probably trying to hide it. "We didn't need to talk about your mother, if you're not comfortable doing that yet. We can talk about anything you want. What's on your mind, Natalie?" That was question number 24. I was busy tallying the question in my mental scoreboard, so that was what was on my mind. But my secret thought was about how Dad had talked to Michaela and her mom about the situation, and I didn't know what he'd said, and I didn't know what anyone else to know about Mom. I felt like maybe it made her look bad, and I didn't want her to look bad, especially in front of the Menzers. But maybe I was embarrassed by her. I didn't want to be. What I wanted was to stop caring about Michaela, to shut her out completely, but then I would remember when we were little, hanging out in the lab or the arboretum while our mothers worked. We collected ferns and sticks to run on our own scientific experiments, which always resulted in incredible cures. Cure for hiccups, cure for homework, cure for bedtime, cure for sadness. And of course, our cures always worked, because there was never any other option. We were magic. We were unstoppable. We were scientists. But now Michaela is a cool girl, and I'm not. And it's like Michaela doesn't even remember the way we used to be. Somewhere along the line, she changed. She turned evil. And I guess Mrs. Menzer must be evil, too. Because why else would she fire Mom? The funny part, though, is that Michaela's mom was the one who gave me my very own cobalt blue orchid in the first place. She and Mom had been studying the orchid in their lab, trying to figure out how it survived. The cobalt and aluminum, trying to apply the findings to other plants, maybe even extend the research beyond plants. This was in 4th grade, right when Michaela had just stopped being my friend, and I'd been following Mom around, watching all her work, all serious with my hair clipped up, taking notes in my composition book. "It's pretty," I said, admiring the orchid behind its protective glass, trying to describe its papery leaves in my notes, trying to capture the way it looked like any other orchid until the light hit it, and then the flower became so blue it hurt to look at. I stood there, scribbling and describing and wishing I had one of my very own. And like a mind reader, Michaela's mom had gone to their cabinets and pulled out a seed, just for me. I'd expected Mom to protest. She always talked about how delicate the orchid was, how rare and precious, but she didn't. She just smiled at Michaela's mom, and something passed them that I couldn't understand. And then Mom and I had this beautiful, magical plant for our greenhouse. "Here's a miracle plant of your very own, Natalie," Mrs. Menzer said. "Study it, watch it grow." And we had that orchid until we didn't, until Mom let it die. Dr. Doris asked another question, and I nodded, even though I hadn't quite heard what she'd asked. In my head, I said 25 questions, and I repeated 25, 25, 25, because I didn't want to think about anything else, and I didn't want to forget my scientific data. If you don't repeat the answers, if you don't hold tight and turn them over and over in your head, one day you'll forget, and then they're forever lost. "Well," Dr. Doris frowned, but her eyes were a blend of sad and hopeful and something else too. "That's all the time we have left today. Will you think about what I've said? I nodded, and I thought, 26. After our session on the drive home, Dad turned down the radio to ask, how did your talk with Dr. Doris go? His voice was about 10 notches too innocent, so I responded just as innocently. It went well, I said, and my voice sounded like sparkles and sunshine in the middle of this blizzard. He didn't fall for it. Natalie, I know you aren't happy about the sessions, but I would like you to be open up a little. When he says open up, I pictured him ripping open my chest and exposing all my organs, like a dead frog on a lab table. Without meaning to, I flinched. Dad looked over at me with concern, even though the world had gone white with snow, so he really should have been keeping his eyes on the road. Things have been really hard for you, for all of us, he said, his eyes returning to the road. But I do think it's important for you to express yourself. I almost said I wanted Mom to open up and express herself, but I've gotten too familiar with Dad's miserable, almost crying, trying not to cry face, and I didn't want to see it again. Instead, I told him, I'll try, I promise. I'm mostly sure it was a real promise, because even though I still hated the Dr. Doris appointments, part of me knew he was right. Part of me almost wanted to open up. And even if I couldn't quite express all that, Dad looked over at me and he smiled. 23 by that point. The woman has some scientific questions of her own. December 23rd, assignment. Eggs in action. Mr. Neely was the only teacher to assign something over the winter break, and his homework was simply to keep thinking about our scientific process experiments. Normally this would mean do absolutely nothing, but since the egg drop competition is on January 13th, Dari, Twig, and I had our work cut out for us. Our mission analyst, aka Dari, reworked some of Twig's ideas, and we'd settle on to testing 2 designs today, before Dari goes to India for the rest of the break. The school is closed for winter break, so we had to work at one of our houses, and because Dari's parents wanted to meet his new friends and see what he's working on for school, we met at his house, which made sense, I guess, but was kind of weird, because Dad didn't care what I do. Dad doesn't care what I do as long as it's school related, and Twig's parents don't care what she does, period. So I kind of forgotten that involved parents were a thing. It was too cold to bike to Dari's house, so Dad drove Twig and me over there, and then decided to be all responsible and meet Mr. and Mrs. Kapoor. Both of them greeted us to the door when we arrived, while Dari hovered behind them in the house. They were one of those super in love couples, and Mr. Kapoor kept his hands on Mrs. Kapoor's back while they spoke, as if he didn't even notice he was doing it. And even though I used to get embarrassed when Mom and Dad did stuff like that, I kind of missed it. I started to feel that fluttery anxiousness, so I stopped thinking and tried to pay attention to the parents' conversation. Only, they were talking about boring things like school and the weather. So Twig and I slipped past them to say hi to Dari. Okay, goodbye, Young Jin and Mr. and Mrs. Kapoor, Twig said as we walked around them. I'm sorry, I don't know your first names yet, but I'm sure I'll learn them soon. Dari's parents looked at her with matching frowns of confusion, but Dad just sighed and we disappeared into the house. When we got to Dari's living room, Twig stopped. This is awesome, she said, taking it in. And it was. Nearly every inch of the wall was covered with family photos and bright, colorful paintings of people, landscapes, animals, anything and everything. Dari cleared his throat. Yeah, my parents paint, he said, his tone of mixture of pride and discomfort. My whole family is full of artists. They kept signing me up for art classes. I wasn't very good at it. He shrugged. I could tell that bothered him, and I realized there was so much about Dari that I didn't know. I hadn't meant to, but I guess I'd been thinking of him as kind of a teacher, like he only existed in the context of school and our egg drop. I had made a new friend since Twig, so maybe I hadn't made a new friend since Twig, so maybe I'd forgotten how it worked. Dari led us out of his room and turned to me as we climbed the stairs. I didn't know your dad was Asian, he said. I guess there are a lot he didn't know about me either. He's half Korean, I said. My grandpa was Italian, but I never met him. You never talk about being Korean, Dari said, and then I felt weird about it, like I'd done something wrong. Being in Dari's house, you could tell they were proud of being Indian. That shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. I mean, Dari never seemed ashamed of it. He actually talks a lot in school about being from India. His mom wears a sari, and his kitchen smells like foods I've never tasted, and his whole house is decorated with pictures of his family back in India, aunts and uncles and cousins, and his 2 brothers who are already adults. I didn't know. It kind of made me feel like my family was bad at being Korean, like I was bad at it. Because, to be honest, I usually forgot that part of me existed until my grandmother visited or someone brought it up. I was only a quarter Korean, and most people couldn't tell just by looking at me. Every once in a while, someone would ask about my race, but I mostly just ignored it. That had never felt wrong until now. The last stop on our tour was Dari's room, where Indian mixed with American, Bollywood posters bordered baseball posters, and I decided I wanted my bedroom to be all of me, just like that. I promised myself that the next time I saw my grandmother, I'd ask her about Korea. We can drop the egg designs from my window, Dari explained as Twig and I walked over to the window to peer out at his setup. Directly under us, in his backyard, he let out a giant tarp and positioned a video camera so we could play the drops back and examine them. Wow, Dari, I said, this is really intense. And then, because that didn't seem like enough, I added, in a good way. He smiled, then led us back downstairs and onto the backyard, eager to show us more of the work he'd done. On their picnic table, he'd already laid out all our materials and drawn up detailed, realistic diagrams for Twig's top 2 designs. Twig held up the diagrams laughing. But Dari, where are their faces? How will we know what the eggs are feeling? Dari looked at me as if he needed me to tell him whether she was joking. I'm pretty sure the idea of somehow upsetting Twig was his personal nightmare. Well, your designs did have a lot of personality, but... We like your designs, Dari, I said, before he could make things awkward. And I think they're pretty artistic, too. At least artistic in a sciencey way. Dari grinned and ducked his head as he grabbed a cotton ball. He pulled the cotton apart, and Twig and I joined him, fluffing white clouds for cotton ball heaven. By the time we got to work on smegs, cutting up twigs and marshmallows, Mrs. Kapoor had come outside with mugs of hot chocolate. Are you sure you don't want to come in? It's so great to meet Darishar's friends, she said, hovering over us for a few extra seconds before going back inside. I think she felt bad about us working outside in the cold, but we were on a mission. We wouldn't stop, not even to go inside and drink our chocolate. Instead, we warmed our hands against the mugs as we sat around Dari's picnic table. Twig rifled through our egg-building materials and stuffed one of the giant marshmallows in her drink, and Dari and I followed suit. Mrs. Kapoor watched from the kitchen window, and Dari smiled into his mug. She's so happy that I finally have friends, he said. Twig laughed awkwardly, because who admits to not having any friends? Well, I moved here a couple years ago. My parents spoke to all my teachers at Lancaster Elementary and asked them to help me make friends, Dari added, as if he were just some silly story and not at all embarrassing. Actually, he continued, even though I kind of just wished he would stop. That's one of the reasons I did this egg drop. Mr. Neely said I could ask some of the other kids to form a group with me. Of course, I got too nervous to actually ask anybody until you guys invited me into your team. I figure now was a good time to point out that he'd actually invited himself onto the team. He smiled hopefully, and I glanced over at Twig, because she was the one who usually started talking in awkward situations. But she turned pink and was busying herself by picking apart a marshmallow. I cleared my throat. I'm glad you joined us. We wouldn't have been able to do this without you. I looked around the yard with Dari's thoughtful, precise setup, and it was true. But still, it was a pretty cheesy thing to say. We all just slurped our hot chocolates and cleared our throats and looked anywhere but at each other for a few minutes. As soon as I finished my mug, I pushed it aside, ready to put the final touches on Smegs. They both looked relieved to change the subject. Twig raised her hand in that silly salute. We finished up Smegs and then got to dropping. Cotton ball heaven went first, and here's the truth. It broke. It happened fast. Drop, splat, drop, splat. After the failed drop, we stood outside, huddled around the video camera as Dari played it back for us. For the first time, the cold air got to me, and I wrapped my arms around myself. We watched our egg break in slow motion. The drop, splat was way worse when you knew it was coming and watched anyway, waiting with hope. The cotton balls weren't thick enough to absorb the impact. Dari paused the camera and pointed to the screen, explaining every single thing we did wrong. Theoretically, we could add another layer and increase the density here if we need to. But let's test Smegs and see if that works. Twig nodded like, yes, tell me more. But I wasn't listening. I just stared at the frozen egg on the screen, right before the splat, when it was still breakable, but not yet broken. Up until now, the egg competition had been important, but far off. It didn't really matter if the eggs broke, because we still had so much time to test them. Today felt like our last chance, and if both eggs broke today, let's just test Smegs already, I interrupted my thoughts. Dari looked up from the camera, surprised at the sudden panic in my voice. But Twig always jumped at the invitation to go. Got it, she said, running over to grab Smegs off the picnic table. We carried our last hope up to Dari's bedroom, and Twig held it out the window as high as she could. I'd like to thank everyone who believed in us and our egg, she said, addressing an invisible audience as if she'd won some grand award and inexplicably putting on a fake British accent. I promise we'll remember this, little people, when we achieve egg drop stardom. Dari smiled, but I felt a flash of annoyance at Twig for still acting silly, for not understanding that the time for jokes was over. This moment was dead serious. I held out my hand to stop her. Can I drop this one? I asked, my voice sharper than I wanted to be. Twig's eyebrows pinched as she noticed my mood shift for the first time, but she stepped back and handed me the egg. Sure thing, Captain, she said, her voice just a little uncertain. I held my breath, and then I let Smegs go. Drop, 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 and the sound of Smegs hitting the driveway, but no splat. We all kind of looked at each other for a minute, like, do we even dare? Dari raced downstairs to inspect our fallen egg. Dari, our calm, collected, studious Dari, running over to our egg like a doctor to his patient. Twig and I ran after him, breathless, while we waited for his analysis, and then he shouted, "It's alive!" Twig screamed and jumped around, celebrating as if we'd won the Egg Drop Olympics or something. "We're done," she shouted. "This is the one. This is our winner." Dari laughed at Twig's enthusiasm, staring at her with a happy kind of surprise, as if he'd never seen anyone so excited before. I laughed and cheered too, because this was exactly what I wanted, and I knew I should have been the happiest of all, but for some reason the happy feeling turned sticky inside of me. Maybe we really would win. Mom and I would go to New Mexico and soak in the miracle of blue flowers, and then everything would be okay, right? Because if it wasn't, then what? It probably didn't help that we had to take our gloves off to build the contraption, and Twig kept shouting, "My fingers are going to fall off," even though you didn't see Dari or me complaining. The day was warm for winter, 45 degrees, and all the snow had melted away.